we have a lot of talking to do and figuring things out and sharing of what works and what doesn't work. So really grateful to everybody. So I want to start off just by recognizing really what a very historic moment this is, and to thank you all for being a part of this historic moment, to be here today, but also for everything that you've done to bring us where we are in history right now, which is actually a really amazing and remarkable moment, because there are movements which are really surging across the country, across the globe right now. From democracy revolutions, which are still very much a work in progress, but they are still ongoing, Occupy protests and the legacy of Occupy, the anti-austerity uprisings, the student movement, which we heard news in Quebec. That movement is still living now. The movement we heard a lot about a couple of years ago, it lives on, and its focus now is not only on the right of students to education as a human right. In addition to healthcare as a human right, we should have public higher education as a human right offered for free. The students in Quebec have been pushing that, as have students all around the country right now. And I might add also to abolish debt, as well as making higher ed free. Let's get rid of it. We did it for the banks, right? The ones who got us into this mess. How about we do it for the people who've been trapped by this mess? We should be putting the bankers in jail, not bailing them out. We should be bailing them into jail and bailing out the students. And now we've just heard also that there are students who are undertaking a debt strike here in the U.S. right now, which I think is a very exciting idea and something that we need to build on. But you have in Quebec the example where students are not only standing up for their right to education, they're standing up for everybody's right to a decent and humane budget. And they're fighting against cuts to education and against cuts to social services. This is basically the austerity fight, which has come home to roost here in North America as well. And we can be sure that this is not going away anytime soon. This is only going to be getting bigger and bigger, especially as the powers that be contemplate repeating the disasters that have occurred over the last 10 years in the Middle East. Here we go again. So we're going to have lots of austerity to unite us and to energize the fight. We're going to have an austerity draft now instead of a military draft. Austerity will both be forcing people into the military. That's been going on for quite a while. But in addition, it's going to be mobilizing people. And at the end of the day, traditionally that's usually what has mobilized social change. It's above all, it's economic adversity that converges on a generation, a younger generation, because that's when you're putting together sort of that stage of life, conviction and determination, that unalterable resolve that young people have that really bring us to these major social transitions. And we're really at that point right now. And as hard as things are right now, it's really important to remember the silver lining here is that this is yet one more reason that is mobilizing people. And it's really important for us to turn a blind eye and a blind ear to the propaganda of powerlessness, because that's really what it is. It's propaganda which is intended to rob us of our power to fight this. We do have the power to fight it, and in fact we are winning in many very surprising places, like the recent victory with the Federal Communications Commission for a free and open internet to prevent the privatization of the internet. We also won the fracking battle in the state of New York. Talk about a critical battle. Which has certainly changed the playing field for the rest of the country. I think it makes it very difficult for them to push through pro-fracking legislation anywhere now in the wake of New York's decision and the public health report from New York as well. So that was a very surprising victory. If you look at, let me think, the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, for people to be standing up in the face of that incredible danger and saying no to police militarization and brutality and the racist prison structure that we have, and really the prison state that's been developing. There are many victories out there. Oh, and also remember in 2013, we actually stopped the war on Syria before it began. We stopped it. And what changed between then and now is that, you know, essentially there's been a public relations campaign around ISIS. And it's not as though ISIS is the first really brutal and horrific force out there. Many of the incredible cruelties and human rights abuses of ISIS are also going on right now, not only in Saudi Arabia, which has its share of beheadings, but also among the Shiite militias, who we are promoting to fight with ISIS. You know, and it was, ISIS was sort of part of those many groups that we were kind of indirectly supporting or at least tolerating in Syria because they were fighting against Assad. You know, so we'll get into that in a minute. The chaos that in the incredible disaster, otherwise known as U.S. foreign policy. We'll come back to that. But the point being that we were able to stop that war. People are not at all, shall we say, relaxed or happy about our foreign policy quagmire in the Middle East. And people tend to support fighting back against ISIS because they think there is no alternative. That you're not, if you're not bombing ISIS, then you're obviously supporting ISIS. And, you know, that's obviously ridiculous. And there are much more effective ways to stop ISIS. There is nothing ISIS wants more or benefits more from than to be the subject of a U.S. bombing campaign. In fact, I don't know how many people heard the really crazy news the other day that in fact the Shiite militias are walking away from their front lines of battle containing ISIS because the U.S. started bombing ISIS. So because the U.S. has now entered that fight in Iraq, you have the Shiite militias supported by Iran, which are pulling out because they don't want to be on the same side that we are. And there's confused news reports about this. Some say that, no, we kicked them out. But I find that really hard to believe because it's the force of the Shiite militias on the ground which are stopping ISIS. I mean, you know, there's no win here. This is such a crazy, immoral, illegal, self-serving, horrific, anti-humane set of policies and strategies. There is no win here. And it's important to remember that ISIS is the poster child of U.S. foreign policy. ISIS is what we created in that incredible vacuum and violence. And ISIS very much benefits from U.S. engagement. They benefit from U.S. violence because it polarizes people in their favor. In the same way that U.S. engagement now with the bombing campaign in Iraq has forced the Shiite militias to withdraw, that is a case in point. That it doesn't serve our interests to be using force in the region. It's extremely disastrous. It creates the chaos that leads to more extremism and terrorism. It's become almost impossible to follow on a day-to-day basis what the latest development is. Are people finding that? It's like, who's fighting who? Who's supposed to be the good guy now? Whose side are we on? Who's the latest force that has our weapons? Because we've basically, more than anyone, weaponized the Middle East. And ISIS is fighting with our weapons. Syria, everybody in Syria is fighting with our weapons. These are our weapons. There are various reports out there as to exactly how much of the world's weapons supply we are accountable for, but all the reports agree that we are number one. So we have created this minefield. We have created this tinderbox out there throughout the Middle East. And we'll talk through this a little bit, and then we're going to talk about some kind of common denominators in this disaster zone all over the Middle East. What are the common denominators? But I did want to mention, just a few of these really critical problems that exemplify what an absolute quagmire we are in. We're not only in, we have caused. There's nobody else that caused this fundamentally, and it goes way, way back. And of course, there have been reactions and counter-reactions, and it's hard to find the good guys when things get this messy. Everybody gets involved in the violence and self-defense, and when self-defense then becomes offense, it's very hard to sort it out. So it's really important, I think, to go back to first principles about what a foreign policy should be based on. And I will get to that in 1 second. Before thoroughly jumping into foreign policy, I wanted to just say a few more words about why this is such a historic moment. It's a historic moment not only because the rebellion is in full swing, the resistance is really rising up among students, among immigrants, among people who are trying to hold on to their housing, and you have eviction blockades where neighborhoods band together to help homeowners stay in their homes. We have, not only the resistance is alive and well, the resistance and the efforts at transformation as well, so that we have green jobs and we have communities where workers are standing up and fighting for living wages, and where in some places they're actually beginning to win those wages. So we have these struggles that are going on and that are gaining incredible momentum, even while the powers that be are telling us that we are powerless and it is hopeless. Remember, that is their propaganda. At the end of the day, if this is any semblance of a democracy, and we have to struggle to make it so, but we at least have that value on our side. This is supposed to be a democracy. This country has the promise of democracy that we carry. And based on those principles of democracy, it is one person, one vote. And at the end of the day, it's the 1% against the 99%. So we are 99 times more powerful at the end of the day. They've just created all kinds of distractions to make us think that they are more powerful, but they're really not. And that's one of the wonderful things about getting out there in the street, because then the numbers really begin to exert their power. So it's an exciting moment because that movement for democracy and justice is sweeping across the planet. It's also an exciting moment because the old order is breaking down. There's just no doubt about it. Whatever you look at, whether you look at the climate or our foreign policy, or the weather out there, or healthcare costs, which even under, miraculous Obamacare, which in Massachusetts we call Romney Care, prices for workers, the price of healthcare, the out-of-pocket costs for healthcare for workers over the last 5 years, I believe it's 5, maybe 6 years, have basically doubled, And in Massachusetts, the studies have shown that, you can make it more affordable for some people while it's way less affordable for others. And at the end of the day, what happens to people when you get sick? Because that's supposed to be what it's about, right? Well, at the end of the day, if you get sick, well, then there's a problem. It's great as long as it's just a piece of paper that sits on your desk and makes you think that you have health care, but if you actually get sick, then lo and behold, there's just all kinds of holes that you could drive a hearse through that are not covered by this plan. These are stripped down, streamlined plans that are still expensive, and they still do not provide coverage if you truly develop real illness that needs continuous and ongoing care. You're going to be left in a lurch. In fact, polls in Massachusetts and studies show that if you truly get sick, you're actually in worse shape now than you would have been before Romney Care, Obamacare in Massachusetts, because the safety nets that used to be there are no longer there. So the point here being that, yes, there is a meltdown going on, and it's really a pervasive meltdown of our education system. You know, communities that are struggling just to keep their schools closed, to keep them from being closed, and to make education more than just high-stakes testing, which is increasingly, you know, what our education system is about. So on every front, the system is in meltdown. So, you know, that's the bad news, but it's also, in a way, it's good news, because the system can't go on. These abuses can't go on. These outrages can't go on. They have to change. They have entered their terminal phase here, and it's important to see it as that, and to recognize, above all, as Linda was saying, that at the end of the day, it's we who have the power. They do not have the power. And they work really hard to make us think that we don't. And I'll just share with you quickly how the veil was lifted from my eyes, starting in 2002, actually. And apologies to those who've heard this story before, but I can't resist sharing it. In 2002, in my first race, when I was tricked into running for office because I had no idea what was involved, and I started at the gubernatorial level, which I definitely do not recommend. So there we were in a race, trying to get into the debates, and we made enough noise that we actually got in to a televised debate. And inside that TV studio where the debate took place, just the candidates and the moderator and the camera crew. Inside the studio, you know, I said the kinds of things that we talk about all the time. It's just common knowledge for us that we have a right to health care. We have a right to education. We need to cut the military massively and put those dollars back home. You know, these aren't new ideas, and they weren't new in 2002 either. And I was saying those kinds of things. And being treated like, how many have participated in debates as candidates? Great. You may have noticed, depending on the scene, this happens a lot to Greens. When you talk about really common sense things, they're treated like, you know, those are completely, you know, lunatic fringe kinds of ideas. You know, how could you suggest such a thing? Exactly, and more, you know, just Looney Tunes. And so nobody responded to those ideas or even tried to rebut them. And, you know, I walked out of the hall when it was over, out of the studio, thinking, oh, well, you know, I tried. And when I walked out, I was mobbed for the first time and the last time by the press that told me I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. The last time they ever did an instant online viewer, which makes the point. You know, they are just quaking in their boots. And I might add that after that debate, they dragged out of the closet every living Kennedy and Clinton to come to Massachusetts to say that a vote for Stein was a vote for Romney. And that became the mantra of all the Democrats, you know, and it continues to be the mantra against Greens. But you know what? Even though they might be winning the rigged polls, sometimes known as elections, there are other kinds of polls that they don't rig. And it's really clear that we're not just winning in the court of public opinion, we have won in the court of public opinion. I used to, before I kind of made the great leap and became a political activist, I was a healthcare activist, and then I was an environmental activist, and then I was a clean elections and campaign finance activist, and I was an anti-war activist, and I kept kind of movement hopping every 5 years or so when it was clear that one wasn't working. Let's go try the next one, you know. And then finally, in desperation, you know, I got recruited because nothing else was working. Why not try that? But you know what you discover is when you do this, actually, that people support these common sense ideas. and that what we're talking about is not rocket science. I sort of entered electoral politics out of desperation, but came out of it with inspiration. It was just so amazing to see how much people agreed with us, everyday people. So it's really important not to take their numbers at face value. But if you look at certain kinds of numbers, they are very revealing. For example, recent polls show that majorities of the American public now disapprove of both the Democratic and Republican parties. It's like 55% disapproval of Republicans, 51% disapproval of Democrats. The numbers of people who actually self-identify, it's like 25% who self-identify with Republicans, who talk like they own the world. You know, they don't. They have the money, but they don't own our hearts or our minds and our values, not by a long shot. And I think the number who self-identify with Democrats is something like 33%, something like that. But they're low, you know. Most people are begging for something else. And another factoid to remember is that it's 58%, in fact, according to recent Gallup polls. It's 58% who are clamoring for a new and independent third party. So public opinion is out there. And what is public opinion supporting? Living wages, downsizing the military, real action on climate, healthcare as a human right. You know, it's all the things that we in this room support. So the public is with us. Don't believe for a second the propaganda that would tell us that politics as usual represents the public. They don't by any means. So when I walked out of that debate back in 2002 and I discovered that our agenda had actually won the day already, it's like I personally breathed an incredible sigh of relief to realize we didn't have to change people's minds. We don't change people's minds, history changes people's minds. And history has done it. So our job, really, I began to realize, is just to figure out, so how do we begin to engineer the power that we have? And that's a longer and strategic discussion, but that's what the Green Party is about. You know, that's what running for office is about. That's what working for health care as a human right is about. It's what fighting for the rights of students to end debt and to make public higher education free, to keep our schools open. These are the fights that are substantively critical, but which also serve the purpose of allowing us to organize. And, you know, as candidates, what we learn is how do we articulate those struggles and how do we build those social movements. I think it's a big point of discovery right now for the Green Party because we've been fighting so hard just to exist in this incredibly repressive political environment. And I think we all deserve a great round of applause for managing to survive at a time when no other national, non-corporate political party has managed to survive. That we've managed to do that is by having an army of people who follow the minutia of how to stay on ballots, how to comply with the incredible burden of remaining a legitimate and legal party in good standing. It's not easy to do that. It takes incredible administrative talent. You have to have an army of administrators if you are going to survive as a political party. So hats off to that army of administrators. And they are much more than administrators, too. And I think this is what we're learning as a party now, is that we not only need to keep ourselves on the ballot, we also have to fight these battles to build the social movements and, you know, and to bring those social movements into greater public dialogue and into public view. And as a party that we are here in part to serve those social movements and give them a political voice. The minute we do that, then we really begin to take off. And you know, sometimes people think, oh, you guys just run elections. And we don't just run elections because we are there fighting on the front lines of the social movements too. And we need to stand up and be seen fighting those battles as well. We need to be seen leading the charge for access to public higher education, for keeping people in their homes, for creating affordable public housing at low cost. These are the things that we are doing and we need to do more of. And the more we can reach out to each other and support each other in those movements, the better off we'll all be. And I'm just doing a time check here. Okay. I'll say just a couple more things quickly about the wars, because it's no longer just one single war. You know, the wars have been such an unambiguous disaster. It's like mind-boggling that they're actually gearing up for another round of the same thing. What did we not do first time through? You know, or actually it was the second time through in Iraq. Or what have we not been doing in the last 12 years in Afghanistan that we would do this time? You know, did we let our servicemen and women die in vain because we weren't really trying? I don't think so. I think they were pulling out every trick in the toolkit. The problem was we were doing exactly the wrong things, and we need to fundamentally change direction. You know, so we've had a foreign policy based on total economic and military domination. It's been an utter and abysmal failure. We need a foreign policy that's based on international law, human rights, democracy, real grassroots democracy, and diplomacy. And I just want to sort of summarize key drivers in the quagmire in the Middle East right now. So one is clearly oil, you know, and why are we fighting in Yemen? Because Yemen has access to the, you know, to the water routes. Yemen controls access to the Red Sea and then up to the Suez Canal. So it's very important to the U.S. and Western powers and the oil monarchies that be controlled to serve oil. So that's why, you know, we're all bent out of shape about Yemen, even though Yemen doesn't have very much oil. But it's implicated in the whole oil driving force in this madness. Nuclear weapons are an important issue here, as they are actually all over the world. And of course, Iran is not the only Middle Eastern country with nuclear weapons, right? So, you know, it's really, I'll come back to how we need to approach these problems. Instead of trying to, you know, sort of falsely create this little microcosm and think we're going to solve it in the middle of a house that's burning down, you know, you're not going to put out the fire in one room of the house unless you deal with the fire in the whole house. So we need to deal with the issue of nuclear weapons, which means, in addition, we have to deal with the issue of nuclear power. Because anytime you have a nuclear power plant, you have the potential for rogue nuclear weapons and for rogue states. So you can't separate nuclear weapons and nuclear power. It's a second issue. A third is the issue of conventional weapons and the war industry that promotes the incredibly immoral use of those weapons. Massive global inequality, economic and social inequality. 80 billionaires, 80 people who have at least $1 billion have the equivalent of half the world's population, 3.5 billion people. Okay, that's not a stable world. The issue of inequality and the issue of democracy, because what have we been supporting forever in the Middle East since the origins of Saudi Arabia? When, like after the First World War, I think, in the 1930s, you know, we've been supporting the oil monarchies, which are incredibly repressive and oppressive in every way. So there's a price to be paid, and those chickens are coming home to roost right now. It's the incredible downstream impact. It's the blowback of those issues. Oil, nuclear weapons and nuclear power, the weapons industry, the merchants of death. They should not be, you know, they should not get away with being called an industry. You know, they are criminals. They are moral degenerates, thank you, and worse, inequality and the lack of democracy. So all these things come together. How do we sort them out, you know, or how do we fix them? I mean, this is the advantage of thinking kind of holistically. You can't actually fix one of them without fixing the other. You know, it's like in my work as a healthcare professional, nobody ever came into my office and said, "Hey, doc, would you please fix my kidneys? I'm really worried about my kidneys. Don't worry about my heart or my lungs or my brain or, you know, or my mental health." You know, it doesn't work that way. People get it, that we are whole people, we are whole countries, we're a whole planet. We got to fix these things together. And that is the only way to fix them. So there are actually some incredibly wonderful, cost-saving, life-saving, planet-saving ways to fix these things. Basically, let's get rid of the oil and the nuclear power. When we do that, we basically end these wars for oil, and we also end the nuclear weapons. Let's disband the weapons industry and convert it to a green energy industry. During the Second World War, overnight, we converted the U.S. economy. We converted car factories into bomber factories. Overnight, we became a war economy. Unfortunately, we are still a war economy. But we were able to convert for the purpose of a national emergency. Well, we have a national emergency right now, not only our foreign policy, a global emergency, otherwise known as catastrophic climate change, which you're seeing just a taste of outside today and over the last 2 months or so. In the Boston area, it's really been incredible. It's like being inside of a wall of ice. It's really like we've been in prison it's so amazing to see those walls starting to melt right now. But we've got a climate emergency. So on that basis as well, there's every reason to convert not only our economy, but the global economy. And in fact, solar power right now is not only becoming cost competitive and is cost competitive in many areas of the U.S., but it is in the Middle East. And where is it needed more, than in the Middle East right now to convert nuclear and fossil fuel to solar? Can you imagine if we solarized the Middle East? If we had a Marshall Plan that was part of reparations and aid and humanitarian relief for far less than the cost of our military policy, for a tiny fraction of that, we could be converting the energy system, putting people to work, repaying our debt for the incredible violence and destruction that we have reaped on these countries with over 1 million deaths in Iraq alone. The figures just came out the other day from International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. So a solar Marshall Plan, why not? It would solve a whole bunch of problems in one fell swoop and begin to simultaneously address the inequality. And at the same time, we need to stop supporting military regimes around the world and in particular in the Middle East. Just stop supporting them. No more weapons. No more military aid, which is mostly aid for U.S. military contractors because it's work. Our tax dollars are basically, going into the pockets of military contractors by providing this aid. So there are holistic solutions here, which expand on the concept of a Green New Deal, an emergency program that will put everybody back to work, transitioning the economy on an emergency basis from an economy that is quickly heading over the cliff in every way imaginable to an economy that is sustainable and just and green and that provides good wage, living wage employment that basically makes unemployment a thing of the past, solves the economic problem at the same time that it solves the climate crisis, at the same time that it makes wars for oil obsolete. What's not to love about that? So, this isn't far-fetched, and I'll just add that this isn't like some big expensive deal. Cost studies in the U.S. show that if we did this in the state of New York, it would pay for itself within about a decade and a half in health savings alone. That doesn't even take into account the energy savings or the military savings. Health savings alone, just from cleaning up the energy, are enough to pay for the transition. So between the massive downsizing of the military, along with savings on energy costs, because then you don't pay for energy anymore, and savings not only in the military, but in healthcare as well, and putting people back to work and jump-starting the economy again, you begin to create a system that is a win-win-win, and one of those wins is that it also pays for itself while it improves our health, in addition to ending wars and averting climate change. We're not going to do any one of those things unless we do all of those things. There's just no way that it will work. So this is a good time for us to be standing up and standing together. The other thing about this is that it brings us together as movements for social and economic and climate justice and democracy and for peace. This allows us to join together in a solution that would actually fix it all. So when they say, oh, it can't be done or it can't be solved, it absolutely can, including that ISIS, by the way, ISIS is funded. Not only did we create ISIS, but we can actually stop the funding for ISIS pretty quickly if our so-called allies would stop buying their oil and stop allowing finance and dollars to cross borders. ISIS could be essentially put to bed through nonviolent means. Violent means only creates more successes for ISIS and wins them more converts. The only way to deal with ISIS is nonviolently. But nonviolently, ISIS can be extinguished and its sources of support can basically be dried up. So it's very important to get that word out because it's that fear of ISIS that creates the American support for this new war effort which is going on. So we have a message which is based on truth, which is based on values, which is based on justice and peace. And that's what we're here for, is to get together and promote that message. So with that, I'm going to conclude here, and then we'll move into our next phase of the program. So thank you very much for your